Election day is here. We've talked about it at great length. The big day is finally here. Is Zohran Mamdani going to be the next mayor of New York City? Can Jack Ciattarelli pull it off in New Jersey? Races in Virginia, an important proposition on the ballot in California. All of that, plus later in the show, Dinesh D'Souza of the Dinesh D'Souza podcast joined us for a wide-ranging conversation. You don't want to miss this, folks. All of that and more in today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Well, the big day is finally here. Zohran Mamdani, 92% likelihood, according to the online betting markets, according to Polymarket, of actually winning the mayoral election. Donald Trump posting on Truth Social yesterday, encouraging something that he probably never expected to say. I have not expected to say it either, but Donald Trump doubling down and saying that if you are in New York City, you have to vote for Andrew Cuomo. You have to do it. It is your only option of stopping the Karl Marx quoting radical Islamist adjacent Hamas sympathetic cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs radical. It's the only way. If you're in New York City, you have to vote for Andrew Cuomo. You have to do it. I don't know what Curtis Lee was thinking. Frankly, he's not thinking. He's the Republican nominee. Look, if you were to tell me who I would like to be the next mayor of these three options of the nation's most important city, I would say Curtis Lee. Well, guess what? He's not going to win. Therefore, as Elon Musk put it on X yesterday, a vote for Curtis Lee is a vote for Zohran Mamdani. I am sorry to say it, but it simply is the case. By the way, some new evidence I'm seeing on social media earlier today. A voter who apparently was voting in New York City said that Eric Adams, the current mayor of New York City, who dropped out of the race a few months ago after he lost the Democratic primary and after he just generally realized he had no path to victory here, Eric Adams apparently is still appearing actually on the ballot, which is very concerning. Apparently Andrew Cuomo's name is at the bottom, so it's a total mess. And if you're skeptical when you hear me say that because you think that New York City and the electoral process probably tilts towards the Democratic primary victor, who in this case is Zohran Mamdani, well, your skepticism, frankly, in this situation is probably warranted. Andrew Cuomo, though, making his final pitch, and among Andrew Cuomo's final pitches, basically saying that Zohran Mamdani is essentially full of crap. So here's Andrew Cuomo speaking courtesy of Fox 5 New York.
I deliver. I make things happen that help people. Highest minimum wage, highest MWBE. His promises are all BS, okay? None of it will happen. Freeze the rent. The mayor doesn't even have the legal authority to do.
And he's right. We discussed this a little bit on our show on Friday with Joe Borelli, former Republican leader on the New York City Council. Make sure to check out that conversation if you have not already done so. Mamdani is not going to have the authority to do much of what he promises, but oftentimes when it comes to these transformative leftists, dare I say, authoritarian inkling or authoritarian adjacent politicians, if there's a will, there's a way. They are very rarely stopped by procedural niceties. One thinks of Barack Obama's infamous line in his second term when he was talking about the executive amnesties of DACA and DAPA. One recalls Barack Obama saying, "All I need is a pen and a phone. I don't need Congress." So too, one fears, the ideological successor to Barack Obama in this transmogrified, horrifically dystopian far-left Democratic Party, Zohran Mamdani, so too one thinks that the pen and a phone that he needs is all that will perhaps suffice and be necessary, indeed, for enacting large swaths of his agenda. In theory, the city council could act as a buffer. In theory, the legislature in Albany. In theory, Governor Kathy Hochul in the Empire State could act as a check on this radical fanatic. But he's probably going to do it. And that just makes it all the more imperative that if you are in New York City, that you get out there and you make sure to vote for Andrew Cuomo. Again, far be it from me to say vote for Cuomo, but in this situation, it really is the only shot. Right across the Hudson River in New Jersey, as we've been covering on our past couple shows, Jack Ciattarelli seems to have the wind at his sails. All sorts of anecdotal data that I'm getting from friends there in the Garden State, videos across social media showing that the Ciattarelli momentum does seem to be real, or all sorts of lawn signs. Now, it is worth noting that Democrats right now have going into Election Day, had about a roughly 300,000 early vote advantage. So I don't want to overstate things. I don't want to give you an overly optimistic take. There's a lot of anecdotal suggestions that the Ciattarelli momentum on the ground is real. The early vote is also heavily skewing Democrat. I'm not a big early vote guy as a general rule. I'm skeptical of the notion that early voting trends oftentimes tend to direct the outcome of an election. It is still the case that the majority of Americans these days vote on election day itself. Historically speaking, that was certainly the case more for Republicans as well. New Jersey is just a blue state, okay? That is just the basic reality. Now, it's a light blue state. It's trending more Republican. But if you look at the composition of the legislature there in the General Assembly, the lower house, and the Senate, it is just a Democrat-leaning state. Voter registration numbers similarly have been tightening in recent election cycles, but it is just a Democrat state. So it is a massive uphill battle for any Republican to win statewide in New Jersey. Having said that, it is indeed possible. Chris Christie was the two-term governor of New Jersey in fairly recent memory. Jack Ciattarelli himself lost by only 3.2 percentage points, roughly speaking, to Phil Murphy, the current governor, 4 years ago back in 2021. So he definitely could do this. It is entirely possible, in fact, that he does it. So again, if you're in New Jersey, get off your butt, get to the poll, and make sure to vote for Jack Ciattarelli. That would be an amazing, an unbelievable, amazing, unmistakable sign to the current Democratic Party that they are not fit to be the local dog catcher, let alone fit to lead a state that is trending in a slightly less light blue, slightly more purplish direction. Jack Ciattarelli, for what it's worth, has something of a sense of humor on the campaign trail. This is a kind of a funny exchange here. Jack Ciattarelli talking to a reporter, once again, courtesy of Fox 5 New York.
Obama said you're sucking up to Trump.
Who said that?
President Obama.
President who?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so look, guy's got a sense of humor. I mean, for those of you who are Sopranos fans, I mean, come on, like a guy like with Jack Ciattarelli. I mean, this Italian name out of New Jersey. I mean, frankly, what is not to love? Is he the most right-wing Republican imaginable? No, of course not. He is a blue state Republican on certain issues. Is he a better option than Mikey Sherrill to lead this geographically small but nonetheless highly concentrated and fairly populous state? Yeah, of course he is. So Jack Ciattarelli, hopefully he is able to prevail over Mikey Sherrill there in the Garden State. Elections down in the Old Dominion in the Commonwealth of Virginia as well. Winsome Sears seems like it's something of a lost cause to Abigail Spanberger. We'll see if she's somehow able to pull it off. I don't think it's going to happen, but we shall see. The Attorney General race is the one that's getting even more attention than the gubernatorial race, that between Jay Jones, who had these horrific revealed text messages calling for death for his political opponents, death for cause. I mean, dude seems like a straight-up moral monster. I'm still kind of racking my brain as to how this dude didn't drop out of the race. I mean, that to me is astonishing. I mean, once upon a time where there was something called decency and honor and integrity, which, to be clear, was never a major fixture of American politics. But back when there were those things in American life in general, and a man was revealed as having said these sorts of things once upon a time, he probably would have dropped out of the race. But that's just not the America that we are living in the year 2025, especially when it comes to the Democratic Party. So by all means, if you are in the Old Dominion, if you are in Virginia, make sure, even if Winsome Sears loses the gubernatorial race to Abigail Spanberger, make sure to go ahead and get Jason Miyares, the incumbent Attorney General there, in that AG's position. It's unfortunate that the generally successful, especially from an economic perspective, the generally successful policies of Governor Youngkin there in Virginia could basically just be thrown out the window, but it will be something of a silver lining if one of the nation's more important red state attorneys general, which is what Jason Miyares is, it would nonetheless be a silver lining if he is able to keep his seat there in Virginia. One other ballot development that is worth noting: there is a ballot proposition out in California, Prop 50. This is Gavin Newsom's redistricting plan. Looks like it is probably going to pass, but the polling is actually closer than many are currently reporting. So there's a Public Institute of California poll that just came out last week. 56% of likely voters in the Golden State say they will vote for Prop 50. 43% are against it. So it will probably pass with that kind of margin? Probably. But you never know. So make sure to if you're in California, to get out and vote against Gavin Newsom's redistricting electoral power grab as well. No one really, frankly, wants that to pass, at least certainly if you are a listener or a viewer of this particular show. Another thing that we should dive into here, and we're definitely getting into this at great length with Dinesh D'Souza, I think it is worth briefly chiming in on the latest developments in the continued fallout of the Tucker Carlson platforming of the literal Holocaust denier and just loathsome, detestable, disgusting, racist, misogynist, just complete jerk-off, Nick Fuentes. And we've been critical in recent days of my friend Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, for his his horrific, truly horrific, egregiously bad video last Thursday. His chief of staff has resigned from the Heritage Foundation, and good freaking riddance to that particular individual. The question is, at this point, what the Heritage Foundation, the most important conservative think tank in America, what are they actually going to do when it comes to the source of the problem, which is Tucker Carlson himself? Well, there was a speech last night that President Roberts, Dr. Roberts, gave at Hillsdale College in Michigan, where he is simultaneously saying all the right things about anti-Semitism while also speaking out of the other side of his mouth and saying that they're not going to distance themselves from Tucker Carlson at all. That Tucker Carlson is a permanent friend of the Heritage Foundation. Well, once upon a time, conservative institutions were about ideas, laws, policies, principles, not about individual personalities. No matter how larger than life, no matter how much vestigial clout they may have from their erstwhile, once upon a time cable news days, no matter how close they may or may not be to the vice president of the United States, once upon a time, conservative think tanks still understood that. So I hate to say it. I really hate to say it because he is a friend and someone who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. But Kevin Roberts continues to disappoint. He continues to disappoint when it comes to the deeply ineffective and in some ways offensively bad mop-up job following the egregious fallout of the video that he posted last Thursday. Kevin should distance himself from Tucker Carlson. He should recognize that Tucker Carlson has become a cancer for the right. That Tucker Carlson has become the singular source of the internecine divide on the right. That he is starting to burn down, or trying to burn down, the MAGA coalition. How can you not see that? How can anyone who is sober at this point not see what is happening? I hate to say it, but unless and until Kevin Roberts is able to realize that, we are going to continue to criticize him here on the Josh Hammer Show. It's not fun. I happen to like Kevin a lot. He's a personal friend. But he is acting in very, very wrong fashion right now. We're not going to let him speak out of both sides of his mouth. We're just not going to let it happen. And he hopefully will end up doing the right thing. One final thing before we get to Dinesh D'Souza, host of the Dinesh D'Souza podcast and the well-known filmmaker, most recently of the wonderful film The Dragon's Prophecy. Newsweek, which hosts this show, The Josh Hammer Show, Newsweek is doing a national roundtable on political violence. This national roundtable is part of a partnership between Newsweek and the website All Sides at allsides.com. You can register now for this national roundtable on the horrific, terrible scourge of political violence in America. You can go to allsides.com, and then National Roundtable Political Violence, but just go to allsides.com and you will see, if you scroll, you will see this roundtable that is this Thursday, November 6th, is going to be at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, you can go ahead and register over at allsides.com for this national roundtable on political violence. Certainly a deeply, deeply hot topic and a very troubling and problematic topic at that in these United States. Go ahead and register over at allsides.com. So the longtime listeners of the Josh Hammer Show back in the pre-video era, you might recall we had on a guy by the name of Dinesh D'Souza in our early days. It's always a pleasure to bring back on some of our early guests. So without further ado, what an honor it is to bring in my friend and our colleague on the Salem Podcast Network, Dinesh D'Souza, who really needs no introduction, but Dinesh D'Souza is the host of the Dinesh D'Souza Podcast. He is a well-known documentary filmmaker. His most recent film, which we will be diving into momentarily, The Dragon's Prophecy, and perhaps most importantly, given the current climate online, certainly including the broader political right, Dinesh is a voice of true clarity, and we deeply, deeply appreciate that. We appreciate your friendship, Dinesh. Thank you so much for joining the Josh Hammer Show.
Hey, Josh. It's always a pleasure. How interesting to see what's been happening on the political landscape, particularly on the right side of the aisle. And I should say that this film, which I thought would be timely in a sense in that it connects issues of Israel and Hamas, the war, the peace plan, to the Bible. But little did I know that the film would wade into the middle of a whole other debate that has now crashed upon our shores.
Indeed, very well said. It's nothing less than a spiritual struggle, and we're going to get into that momentarily. But I do want to lead with the news of the day, because it is a very newsy political day out there. I mean, first of all, we had Vice President Dick Cheney, who passed away overnight. I'm not sure if you have any immediate reaction to that, but I would also just love, Dinesh, this is a pretty big election day. I mean, we are on the cusp here of a man who is the singular encapsulation of the Red-Green Alliance, this notion of this alliance between Marxism and Islamism. Zoran Mamdani is the one-man encapsulation on that. He's on the precipice of taking over the reins of the nation's, and perhaps by extension, Western civilization's most important city. The stakes are really, really high. So talk to us a little bit about what you see as the stakes there in New York City. And I would love your thoughts as well on the New Jersey gubernatorial race, because it seems like Jack Ciattarelli is really kind of closing in here at the last second. I think that he has a real chance to pull this thing off, actually.
Well, if that happens in New Jersey, that will be wonderful, because it will show the ability of a red candidate to win in blue territory. And that bodes well for us in a wider sense. I think with Mamdani, it's the opposite, isn't it? It's not just that New York might be kind of losing its mind, and this is particularly ominous just a quarter century after 9/11, but I think Mamdani represents the left's operating model, the Red-Green Alliance. You said it. My wife calls Mamdani an Islamic human victory arch, by which she means the tendency of Muslim conquerors over the centuries to put victory arches on top of churches that they conquered or cities that they conquered, like Jerusalem. And but we can be pretty sure that if Mamdani wins in New York, as seems likely at this point, that model will then be applied to other blue cities, and also to blue cities in red states. It might become the Houston model and the Dallas model. So this is not something that would be confined to the San Franciscos of the world or the Los Angeleses of the world. We could see it happening all over the country. And that suggests that we need a very strong and powerful conservative movement, a strong and powerful MAGA movement, and a strong and powerful right to be able to overcome this.
Now, Dinesh, you live in Texas. I live in Florida. So the two of us, we live in the nation's two biggest and most prominent red states. Is there any element, is there any part of you that is kind of, I'm not wishing destruction, obviously, but is there any element of schadenfreude? Is there any element of kind of just looking down upon blue state and the crazy folks who apparently desperately want this literal Karl Marx quoting Hamas-loving, crazy left-wing radical? Is there any part of you that is saying that this is actually going to redound to the benefit of states like Texas, Florida? This will redound to the benefit of conservatism, redound to the benefit of the right because the Democrats are just going that crazy? Or is that overcome by just genuine sadness and, frankly, just fear as to what the left in America is becoming?
I think that there is an inherent paradox in these situations, which I would put this way. If the Democratic Party in general were to move to the center, that would be, in a way, good for the country, because it would be the case that not in every election are we putting our whole way of life at stake. But it would also make that Democratic Party more difficult to defeat, because it would be closer to the mainstream of what most Americans think and feel. So what we're dealing with is the exact opposite. If the Democratic Party pulls further to the left, if it explicitly embraces socialism, if it starts making common cause with global jihadis, well, on the one hand, we could say that's good news, because now we can hang that millstone around their neck and they're going to be less electable on the national level. That's the good news. But the bad news is that if by some chance they win, then we are looking at the almost active destruction of what we call the United States of America. So on the one hand, there are some political gains to be had from a Mamdani. He is toxic, and he will be toxic in national elections. And we will, in fact, try to hang him around the neck of the Democratic Party. On the other hand, I do think that long term, this kind of thing does not bode well for the country as a whole.
Dinesh D'Souza, folks, is the host of our sister podcast, the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on the Salem Podcast Network. He's a well-known filmmaker, most recently of the film The Dragon's Prophecy. So let's dive right in, Dinesh. Just tell us about the film. This audience might not be familiar with The Dragon's Prophecy. As you said, it's kind of harrowingly relevant, which is kind of how I felt after my book was published earlier this year, Israel and Civilization. I didn't necessarily even realize quite how relevant that book would be while I was writing. I'm sure you feel similarly about your brand new film. So tell us about the film. What were you doing this? What sparked it? What is the basic crux of the film? And how do you see it now in the current environment?
I went to Israel for the first time in December of 22 and was exposed for the first time to biblical archaeology. Now, this is the issue of Christian apologetics, a long-time interest of mine, but I didn't know that you have all these figures in the Bible, some in the New Testament, most of them in the Old Testament, and I thought that probably their footprints have been lost through time because, Abraham was a nomad 4,000 years ago. How can he possibly have left any traces? And so you've got all these figures in the Bible who for many hundreds of years, even thousands of years, are in the Bible, but only in the Bible. There's no non-biblical attestation to them. But somehow in recent decades, starting really with the founding of the State of Israel, but even more in the last 25 years, out of the ground are coming coins, clay seals, stone inscriptions, other artifacts, and suddenly these figures like the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Jeremiah, King David are jumping out of the Bible into the pages of history, like via the pathway of archaeology. So I found this immensely fascinating in its own way. But then comes October 7th, and I thought, is there a connection between this biblical archaeology that I've experienced a year earlier and the war and October 7th? And I realized that there is a connection. The connection is the simple question of whose land is it really? Because the biblical archaeology, quite apart from authenticating the Bible, has the effect of demonstrating unequivocally the presence of the Jews in their ancestral homeland going back not 2,000, not 3,000, 4,000 years ago. And it does this definitively through the language of science itself. So that's when I got the idea of making the film. And then along comes this character, Jonathan Kahn, with a book called The Dragon's Prophecy. And he introduces an element I hadn't thought much about, which is biblical prophecy, the fulfillment of ancient predictions in the Bible. Things like the Jews will be scattered to the ends of the earth and will come back to their ancestral homeland. I mean, think about this. This was said around 600 years before Christ. And it's said multiple times, by the way, in the Hebrew scriptures. And sure enough, it comes to pass. So all of this is woven together in this film. The website is thedragonsprophecyfilm.com. It's now streaming on multiple platforms. You can also buy the DVD. So that's a little synopsis of what this film is all about.
Well, please go ahead and do check out if you have not already done so. And, Dinesh, one place over in Israel that I think you and I have both been to that I talk about in my book a little bit as well is the city of David, which in Hebrew we refer to as Ir Dovid. And this is kind of the epicenter of biblical archaeology right in the heart of Jerusalem. And in my book, I talk about this amazing experience. I've been to the city of David probably 3-4 times, give or take. But I had this one amazing experience. I think it was my most recent time there, where our tour guide, there was a brand new excavation. He just pauses for a second, and he actually takes out his Bible, and he reads this exact passage from the book of Jeremiah, I think it was, talking about King Hezekiah. And it's describing a certain coin in the passage, and then he shows us the literal coin. So, for those Bible lovers out there, check out The Dragon's Prophecy. If you're able to, please go to places like City of David. It really is just amazing about how the Bible can just actually come to life there. It is a truly kind of surreal experience for Bible lovers, for believers, frankly, even for non-believers. Maybe it'll kind of make you more inclined towards belief, or at least a little less skeptical of those of us who actually are believers. But Dinesh, I guess one question for you to kind of follow up on that. There are a lot of folks there who, when they hear these kind of arguments, they say, I don't really care who was there first. These are kind of folks, especially on the left, who would say, if that argument is the case, then why don't we in the United States give the land back to the American Indians, to the Sioux tribe and the Iroquois, Algonquins, the Navajo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you respond to that basic argument when that comes up among these typically bad faith interlocutors?
I would say that the claim of being the original inhabitants doesn't by itself settle the issue. How does any group anywhere in the world get the title deeds to any piece of land? If you think about it, there are really only three ways. The first way is you were there first. The second way is you got it through some kind of negotiation or deal. And the third way is you got it by conquest. I cannot think of any piece of real estate on the planet, any country whose borders were not established in one or more of these three ways. Now let's apply these three ways to the state of Israel. The Jews were there first. They are the original inhabitants of the land. Check. Then the Jews got the land by negotiation from the United Nations after World War II. Check. And three, the Jews have fought multiple wars, 48, 67, 73, to hold the land by conquest. Check. So there is no country in the world, there are no people who have a stronger claim than the Jews to the land of Israel, because Israel checks all the three boxes.
No, I totally agree with that. It's very much an argument that I made as well. So the indigeneity argument is essentially possibly necessary, but it's not quite sufficient. But when viewed in the broader totality of I mean, literally, Dinesh, I think you and I agree. Every which way that it is legitimate for a people to have possession of a state, the Jews can claim that over the land of Israel there. And frankly, the folks who are competing that to the contrary, I think, just don't really know exactly what they're talking about.
Josh, the reason that we have Indian reservations in America, the reason we have all these casino benefits, the reason we have all this affirmative action for American Indians is because in America, there's a disputed claim. The Native Americans go, we were here first, we checked that box. And then the white man can say, well, you were conquering each other, your tribes were taking the land one from the other, and then the white man took it from you. So the conquest box goes in a different direction. And precisely because this is contested territory, essentially all these concessions have been made to the American Indians, which wouldn't otherwise be made if the title was all that clear.
Right.
But my point is, in Israel, it is clear because Israel scores on all the three criteria that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the most recent time I was there, we were actually in Hebron, which is actually, you mentioned real estate transactions. Hebron is actually the site of the world's first recorded real estate transaction. Actually, this is where Abraham, the patriarch, actually famously buys a plot of land to be where he'll be buried, and his son Isaac and Jacob and all of them there. And sure enough, the Cave of the Patriarchs is very much still there in Hebron. And I remember walking along the streets of Hebron the last time I was there, and my friend who was leading us on this tour showed us this kind of alleyway that was apparently where Abraham and the others stepped 4,000 years ago. I mean, we're talking a very, very long time ago, that there is just clear, traceable, archaeologically salient evidence of the Jewish people having been in the land of Israel quite literally since the days of the Bible. So again, folks, Dinesh D'Souza really needs no introduction, but he is the host of the Dinesh D'Souza podcast, our sister podcast on the Salem Podcast Network. Please do check out his latest film, The Dragon's Prophecy. And, Dinesh, everything that you're saying here when it comes to not just the land of Israel, not just to the Jewish state of Israel in its modern post-1948 form, but really just the Jewish people in general. It's funny. I'm a Jew that I don't particularly love talking about the Jews. I kind of feel like I kind of have to, because there's so much hostility coming from the other direction. But unfortunately, I would say my people have become one of the epicenters of the broader American political conversation, partially because of the October 7th war. The war that was launched by Hamas on October 7th, I should say, but certainly partially other by bad faith actors, not just on the pro-Hamas, Black Lives Matter, pro-SJP left, but increasingly on parts of the so-called right. And I emphasize so-called or nominal right because I'm not even particularly sure that a lot of these folks are even on the right, which is itself actually part of the broader conversation. But this whole mess, Dinesh, has just now totally burst out into the open just over the past week after Tucker Carlson, who was already deeply spiraling, as anyone who was paying any attention had noticed. He had on a literal Holocaust denier, a literal dripping racist, misogynist, just a truly despicable, loathsome human being, frankly. Nick Fuentes, Tucker platformed Nick Fuentes, sanitized him for a puffball interview. And then a few days after that, you had Kevin Roberts, who's a friend of mine. You had Kevin Roberts, the friend of the Heritage Foundation, issue, I thought, an appallingly and egregiously bad video not just defending the Tucker platforming of Fuentes, but doubling down and saying that there's nothing Tucker could ever do that would make the Heritage Foundation, this pinnacle of the right, distance itself from Tucker. So what the heck is going on here? You've been around the block a little bit longer than I have. Have you ever seen a true threat to the integrity of the right in your lifetime quite like this?
It's very unique, and I'm still trying to fully grapple with it, because I think what's going on is not quite what meets the eye. And let me put it this way. I had this debate with Nick Fuentes, so I got a chance to have a look at this guy kind of up close. And in our debate, by the way, he was very much the schoolboy, with the navy blazer and the very well-mannered demeanor and so on. And I even complimented him on that. I said, Nick, I'm really glad you haven't dragged this debate into let's deport Dinesh or any of that. We've been able to talk about policies, Trump's action in the Middle East, and so on. I think that what's going on here is that a guy like Nick, who just sort of cheerfully embraces the Nazi label. Like, I'm Team Hitler, if you've probably seen that
Yep.
meme from Nick. But the question is Nick a real Nazi? And what I mean by this is, would Nick actually do the things that Hitler did? I think the answer to that question, strangely, is no. Nick is a wimp. I mean, he's a beta male. Look at his, high-pitched voice, his effeminate manner, people have pointed all this out. And I think his followers totally know it. So what's really going on here, I think, Josh, perversely, is a bit of a sick inside joke between Nick and his followers. They know that he is a performance art Nazi. He's a Nazi poser. So then you have to ask, well, why would somebody pose as a Nazi? Like, why would somebody want that label? And the answer, I think, is it's the ultimate FU. It's the ultimate middle finger. It is the ultimate sort of, I am a rebel. I'm Jimmy Dean of the 21st century. I'm not a member. Even the New York Times kind of caught on to that. You might have noticed that their photo of Nick is basically a kind of sketch of Jimmy Dean.
Yep.
And so what I'm getting at here is that you got this kind of Groyper nihilism out there. And I think cynically, people like Tucker, maybe even Megyn Kelly to a degree, have figured this out. And they want to tap into this phenomenon. This is the only explanation for what's going on. It's actually an effort to re-engineer the right, to take over the MAGA movement using these Groypers as the militia. I mean, think of Mussolini's, black shirts or Hitler's brown shirts. This is the social media equivalent of that, using these nihilists who, by the way, they're not that large in number, but they have no life. These are guys who stay up all night and they spend hours and hours on social media platforms, and because they hate their lives, they put out these poisonous attacks against you, against me, against very nice and mainstream people who are raising the mildest objections. But this is what they do. And so I think what's happened is that some of the leaders on our side have figured out it's very useful to have this kind of a intimidation army that can beat almost anybody else into submission. I mean, think about it. Before a handful of us started speaking out against Tucker, there was dead silence for something like a year. Tucker was essentially grazing unmolested until people started calling him out. That's happened only very recently. So I don't think that this is a complete analysis I'm giving you, but it's the beginning of what I'm trying to figure out is really going on here. And it's not quite as simple as we're seeing a revival of like Nazism on the right. It's something else masquerading as Nazism.
So part of my thesis is that what I think that Tucker and some of these other folks really want is to burn down the contemporary right, as you alluded to, and to build something new in its place. And then new entity seems to me that it would be anti-biblical, so effectively neo-pagan, frankly just anti-Western in many ways, pro-Russian, pro-Chinese, pro-Iranian, etc. I guess the question is why? Is it a pure unadulterated power play, or have many of these people with large platforms, folks like Matt Gaetz, you and I are both former guests on his One America News show. He has increasingly joined the crowd. There's any number of other examples. I mean, have these folks all just bought enough of the Kool-Aid so as to justify their cynical, self-serving attempt to burn it down and build something new? Is that how you see it?
I think Nick wants to burn it down. Because Nick has been the ultimate marginal figure, and the ultimate marginal figure recognizes that if there's complete arson, if you will, political arson, and everything is shattered, that person has a better chance to improve their position on the spectrum, which is true. A guy like Tucker, I think, is looking at it in a more opportunistic way. And I've been puzzling over Tucker's motives for a while because it doesn't seem to make sense to me that, a $15 million startup investment, connected to Qatar, even if that's the case, I don't think it makes sense for a guy like Tucker who can monetize his following and get there on his own. He doesn't really need Qatar to pay the electric bill. So what is driving a guy like Tucker? Now, let's say, I'm Tucker. And I say to myself, you know what? I can't make much headway with Trump, but I've got JD in my back pocket. I helped JD. By the way, I'm not giving you JD's view of the matter. I'm just giving you a potential way of looking at it from Tucker's point of view. I helped JD get to the Senate. I told Trump he should pick JD as the VP, so I own JD. And therefore, if what I can do here is line up some of the institutions on the right, if I get the Heritage Foundation, if I get Turning Point USA, and then if J.D. Vance can be sort of wrestled to the ground into submission to my view, I'm basically going to be the man I'll be the Rasputin, if you will, of the Republican Party. So this is a very big power play. And ultimately, I think, as you've recognized, it's an effort to do an end run around Trump because it would involve JD completely repudiating Trump. So I don't think I have a lot of confidence in JD. I haven't given up on JD, but I do think that it's worth trying to flesh out the game that Tucker is playing. And I think this is really his true motive.
Yeah, I had a friend recently speculate to me along the exact same lines and actually use the exact same Rasputin analogy. So that makes some sense to me. I guess it's placing a very large wager that J.D. Vance is really going to go along for the ride when there seem to me to be some obvious possible reasons why he wouldn't, among the fact, I mean, there's a lot of facts about that. Among the fact that his beautiful, wonderful wife Usha, who I've met personally before, is Indian. She is not Christian. This is something that the Groypers, the Fuentes army. I mean, it's not really an army, but this online group of basically disgruntled incels. I mean, they hate this. I mean, Fuentes has used the most disgusting language imaginable to talk about JD and his beautiful wife and their beautiful children and so forth. There's so many other reasons I could think of why JD wouldn't go down this road as well. It does seem to me like kicking Tucker to the curb in some form or fashion is kind of a question of when, not if. I don't know exactly when the moment will be, God willing, when that finally happens, but is that essentially how you see this playing out? Do you think that Tucker has become so problematic that for Vice President Vance to have a real shot at the nomination in 2028, he's going to have to kick Tucker to the curb? Or do you think that he can try to continue this kind of coalition that includes everyone from Tucker Carlson, folks like that, to you, myself, etc.?
I think that the Tucker scheme has backfired, but I also think that I can totally see why until it backfired, it was going pretty well. Consider the arrogance of Tucker to, let's say, platform Fuentes, the guy that Charlie Kirk hated the most. I mean, I cannot think of another guy that Charlie Kirk hated except That's Fuentes, right? And so what is Tucker doing by mainstreaming Fuentes? He's basically saying to Turning Point, I dare you to cancel me. I am the keynote speaker at your convention. I am platforming a virulent anti-Semite, and partly in the process, I mean, there are a lot of other things Tucker has done to earn the position of like America's leading anti-Semite. I still think that you guys need me more than I need you. And so I'm going to call you, in a sense, on this and force you to, in a sense, betray Charlie by keeping me as your numero uno. And that was actually, so far, that plot has been going pretty well for Tucker. Second, look at Heritage, which is pretty stodgy, pretty mainstream. Yes, it's it's a combination of Reaganism and Trumpism. So for Tucker to be able to sort of dig deep enough at Heritage, where Heritage is basically almost ready to drive the truck like off the cliff because of Tucker. It's sort of like, either we're going to go down with Tucker. So Kevin Roberts, even in his late speech at Hillsdale, essentially said, we're not repudiating Tucker. Tucker is a friend. And so now he's down to the loyalty, kind of what Megyn Kelly had said. I know Tucker very well. We're loyal to him. We're not repudiating him. So these people are pliable to Tucker. And Tucker had good reason to believe that if I just keep going, who's to say that J.D. Vance won't find himself in the exact same position? I can get his staff to be this way, all loyal to me as much as to him, and ultimately he too will find himself in the same pit as, say, Kevin Roberts has. Now, all that being said, I think what Tucker did not count on is for the collective institutions of the mainstream right, including the MAGA movement, not just Jewish institutions, but Christian institutions, not just Jewish donors, but Christian donors, lots of people who don't have a direct stake in this, to come out very forthrightly and very insistently against him. This, I think, has taken him by surprise. This explains his latest somewhat feeble efforts to backtrack, because I think he realized he might have gone a little too far.
Well, among the ways that he went too far was that he directed his ire on the Fuentes interview, if we can even call it an interview, but he directed his ire, among other places, not merely to Jews, but to Christian Zionists, who he said are basically a bunch of heretics. Well, last I checked, Christian Zionists are at a minimum a plurality of the Republican voting base, and maybe a literal majority. I don't know the exact numbers there, but I saw folks like Tony Perkins, the head of the Family Research Council, put out a long statement or a video quoting the New Testament, basically just saying you're wrong, like you're dead wrong. This is a form of heresy. So it seems to me like he clearly overshot the mark. And unfortunately, you mentioned the Heritage Foundation, and this conversation, I think, for some viewers and listeners seems a little inside baseball, a little in the weeds, but I think it's not, because we're talking here about some of the leading organs of the American right. Turning Point USA, which the late, great Charlie Kirk had built into one of the leading organs of the right. The Heritage Foundation, the decades-long, half-century-plus-long pinnacle of the American intellectual right, an organization that Kevin Roberts helped rebuild, really, after kind of a dull period when he took it over in January of 2022. And Dinesh, I was telling the audience in yesterday's show, it brings me no pleasure whatsoever to criticize Kevin, who I know personally quite well. In fact, at the Heritage Foundation's headquarters in Washington, D.C., on the ground floor, there's literally a photo of me on the Kevin Roberts show. I was one of the first guests on his show when they launched that show. So none of this is fun. It's frankly actually quite unfun. But you have to call a spade a spade. There's no point in getting in this business if you're not going to call a spade a spade. And Kevin has egregiously messed up here. That's just the unmistakable fact. And you alluded to the speech that he gave at Hillsdale College last night. I haven't seen the whole thing, but it seems to me like he's not distancing from Tucker Carlson. So just focusing on the heritage element of this ongoing drama, Dinesh, what should happen? What do you think should happen, and what do you think will happen if you had to put on your prognostication cap?
Well, if you listen to Kevin Roberts, he is almost deliberately conflating two things that are quite obviously distinct. One is canceling Tucker Carlson, and the other is disapproving of the things that Tucker Carlson has publicly said. Two quite different things. As far as I know, there's no effort to, quote, cancel Tucker Carlson. He has a big platform. He's going to continue to have a platform. I'm not aware of a single conservative who has called for boycotting his advertisers. So Tucker is not being canceled. That's a fact. It's something entirely different to say that he needs to be Heritage needs to funnel millions of dollars to the Tucker Carlson network, or they have to embrace what Tucker represents, or Tucker's ideology, or have, let's just say, Tucker keynote at Turning Point USA. That's a whole different thing. That's a way of saying we're choosing to have this guy represent our views and be, if you will, the embodiment of who we are. That's a completely different thing. Now, for a guy as smart as Kevin Roberts not to sort of see that or know that, it's mind-boggling, right? So you have to say, and this is, I think, what many people are concluding, that he is deliberately muddying the waters to pretend that the calls for disavowal of Tucker's views are a call to cancel Tucker Carlson. And that's simply an untenable position, and one that he cannot defend. I think that there are a number of the Heritage trustees who recognize that this is an intellectual and a moral catastrophe. I'm sure that there is all kinds of donor traction going on behind the scenes. So I don't want to get in the middle of all that. I'll just say that, without knowledge of how it's going to go, I just hope that Heritage can correct course before it's too late.
It is imperative for the soul of the American right, which is the last hope of saving this country, and by extension, the last hope of saving Western civilization. It is imperative for the soul of the right that soul not be corrupted by Nazis, by literal racists, and by those who sanitize and fetishize literal Nazis and racists. And we're talking here again about one of the leading organs of the entire movement, the Heritage Foundation. So I genuinely hope, Dinesh, indeed I pray that my friend Kevin Roberts is ultimately able to do the right thing, but I have to just be candid here and say that I have not been particularly impressed by what I have seen in this mop-up job after that horrific video last Thursday thus far. But one man that I'm continually impressed by is today's guest. That, of course, is Dinesh D'Souza. Check out the Dinesh D'Souza podcast, our sister podcast on the Salem Podcast Network. Follow him on X at Dinesh D'Souza. The new film, which we discussed, is The Dragon's Prophecy. You can purchase the DVD or watch it online. Dinesh, as we mentioned and as we've discussed, and as the audience has seen and heard, you are a voice of clarity in a wilderness of just myopia and just muddled thinking. So thank you for what you do. God bless you, and you're welcome back anytime on The Josh Hammer Show.
Josh, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. And thank you all for tuning in to today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show.